many other of the partners that we work with across the country. So welcome, everybody. And I'm going to just quickly take you through what the agenda is for the day. Thanks there, Josh. I'm not sure how clear that is for people, but very briefly, just to say that we are launching the State of Energy in South African Cities 2020 report. We're going to kick the day off with a short video that really just celebrates Sustainable Energy Africa's 20 existence. And there's a lovely lineup of 20 years of sea and the State of Energy in Cities 2020. We'll then go into our two guest speakers, so our keynote address and respondent. Then we will launch the State of Energy report, giving you the report highlights, and close with a vote of thanks. So that's the lineup for the day. And if we have time, there will also be some Q&A after the guest speakers, because they won't necessarily be able to stay for the entire day. And then we will also have a session for some discussion after the presentation of the report. So what I'd like to do just before we open with the video on celebrating Sea's 20 years is really just to sort of set the scene for the day, and to give you a little background into the State of Energy report. And I think there are just three themes that I thought I'd like to draw out in setting the scene. The first one, and these are not my words, but I think the words of one of Sea's founders, Sarah Ward, is that really this has been a process of making visible the invisible. So those of you who work in the energy space know that energy is a strange and intangible sort of concept. It's almost invisible, and it's only really seen where it is used, at the point of use, what it's useful for. And the idea of cities and energy, when sustainable energy began in 2000, it wasn't clearly understood. And very often people said, oh no, energy is not our mandate. It's not what a city manages. And so the process has really been one of making visible the invisible. And the State of Energy reports has really been the key thread through that over the years. And so when we pushed that boat out, and it was one of the first sort of major pieces of work that I tucked into in my career at sea, was undertaking the first State of Energy report that was published in 2006. And it was a really exciting venture because the first thing was that we did it in a highly participatory mode. So we had a few sessions with city stakeholders, the Department of Energy was there, we had the NGO sector, and we identified as a group, well, what are the key indicators? What do we want to measure? What do we, because in measuring it, of course, is you saying that this is what matters, this is what is important. So we did that collectively, and those indicators remain in place today and in the report today. And then and then we got the data in painfully and slowly, and slowly the picture emerged. And at that point, certain things weren't known. You know, we really didn't know the relative consumption in these kind of dense nodes of cities relative to the national. So that was an extremely exciting journey. We've since learned that, and it'll be presented today, you know, macro change is not quick. And when it does happen, however, it can happen all of a sudden, and it usually happens because of a combination of kind of different forces coming into play, and then it suddenly sort of tumbles out and happens. So it's an interesting space to be working in, and there's been an enormous amount of work. I think South Africa can really hold its head up high in the global arena on this space. The second theme that we want to draw out today and into our sort of more detailed sessions following this is really the democratization of energy. And this is a concept that is talked about quite a lot, particularly in the global north. And I think we've got a lot to contribute from the global south as to what does that mean in our context. And I think in particular, what we can bring into the space is the role of municipalities. So we have a foundation of municipalities being very involved in, particularly in electricity distribution in this. And that's really a very important space from which to start. So in the global north, there was a lot of initial interest in the idea of kind of collective ownership of energy. And there's been a shift, very recently, a shift back towards thinking that, in fact, a degree of state planning is really important, and the role particularly of the municipality is key because it's close enough to people. It's a democratically elected organization and very strong. So there's an important role in local government there. So we think that's exciting, and we're really looking forward to hear particularly from our guest speakers on that. Which brings me to my last theme, which is really that of partnership and leadership. And when I introduce our guest speakers today, I think it'll be made very clear the notion of leadership being critical in the space. Parks Tau, the Deputy Minister for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, spoke recently at a global ICLEI webinar. And he spoke about the need for a whole of society response to integrated urban development. And he noted particularly the leadership role of SALGA and of the South African Cities Network in taking that work forward. But he went on beyond that, and he said this work also critically needs to involve partnerships and the private sector and the non-profit organizations in terms of coming up with solutions. So I think that is then the third and last theme that runs through our report and hopefully will run through our discussion today. So Josh, if I could hand over to you to screen the celebratory video, which will just introduce everybody to Sustainable Energy Africa, our 20 years, and please enjoy it.
Thanks, Meg. Let's see if all works according to plan. Usually it wouldn't on a nice occasion like this. Here we go. So that should be it. So you can just let me know, Megan, if you can hear everything fine.
Great. It's perfect, Josh.
Awesome. Beat myself quick.
Sustainable Energy Africa is 20 years old this year.
In the early days, if you approached a city and wanted to know what the energy picture was, the best they could do is direct you to the electricity department. Nobody knew anything about energy in cities in those days.
There's more and more demand for the kind of work that is going on in all municipalities now. But in those days, there was none of that. It was just Sustainable Energy Africa knocking on doors saying, you need to have an energy plan.
Well, Sustainable Energy has created the space for energy issues to be considered at a city level in South Africa. Without the existence of this organization, I really don't think that cities would have come as far as they are with considering energy as the golden thread through all the work that they do.
Amazing, that's the word. It's been amazing. I mean, I can already think about some of the events that we've been co-hosting with Sustainable Energy Africa, the input and the leadership that Sustainable Energy Africa has been giving on these events. Just to make sure that the agenda and the intent and the objective to do those events was clear.
Energy Africa, I think of robust research, of quality training, of strategic facilitation.
Sustainable Energy Africa is very knowledgeable and interested in the impact of their work. So it's been very refreshing to work with people who know and understand why they do what they do.
ANC has been really receptive and pioneering in terms of what they have integrated into their work practices, you know, the buggered leave, the flexibility, just the general humanness of the workplace, the flatness of the workplace, not hierarchical, the fact that everybody feels part of it.
Went onto the web. I noticed that they clearly wrote it out in their website about their work-life balance, and when I read that, it just felt so in sync. Wow, what a place that could actually put out what they is a culture of the organization.
Happy employees perform to the best of their ability, so there's no clock watching or anything. You do your thing, you just need to deliver on time.
Looking at development, human welfare, poverty, and climate impact in cities.
So for the South African Cities Network, it has enabled us to positively impact on our city practitioners on the work that they do around energy, and that in turn impacts on the lives of communities.
So my work with the South African cities has been ongoing for the past 4 years and has revolved mainly around climate action planning and energy strategies.
C has at its core the value of partnerships, because probably all the work that it does cannot be done without establishing trusted relationships between the key role players that are involved in sustainable urban energy development.
It's quite tremendous. The CIA has not just been a partner that has been with us in terms of the advocacy role, but they've been with us in terms of doing the work itself that needs to be, done to support municipalities on the matters of the guidelines for renewable energy, energy efficiency strategy.
For us to build municipal staff capacity around current energy issues, especially sustainable energy issues, to focus on themes that are of current interest to our city practitioners, to our city officials.
Management you don't know, so you need the data to inform evidence-based policy and action, because otherwise, you can't just implement a policy and not know what kind of impact it has. Maybe it has negative financial impact.
Sustainable Energy Africa role in shaping the energy agenda in this South African cities. I think for quite some time now, it started with this state energy in the cities.
The State of Energy report is one such key document which highlights the status quo of energy and climate change in South Africa.
And see as once the mainstream picks something up, to move on, to go into the next pioneering area, to try and get donor funding for the what the future needs are going to be.
We will wait and see what arises and run with it and grab it. But I do think that it's likely, in terms of the sort of technical side of things, I think electric mobility is going to be a big space we've got to move into. And I think the embedded or distributed generation is obviously going to be a huge thing.
And pushing from the bottom up in terms of smoothing the kind of regulatory environment, as well as a skill set to be able to embrace a full-on implementation of renewable energy and energy efficiency, in that providing clean, safe, equitable energy for all.
What democratizing energy means is something that really needs more work. I think there's sort of northern models that this means, collective ownership of power plants and so on. And I think in this country we still really have to work out what is a more people-centered democratic energy system look like, and how do we work with that to leverage the opportunities there, but at the same time strengthen local government to be the holder of the public good. but let them loosen their sort of grip on the management of things and be much more of a facilitator and an enabler, but with strong leadership around public good. We really need that leadership.
Look up, you see the sun is shining. Look up, you see the sky is blue. Look up, the sun is raining money. Look what the sun can do for you. Get your piece of the sun. The sun will save you money every day. Get hot water all day long. Get a soda water heater, you can't go wrong. Get your piece of the sun.
Thank you, Josh.
Awesome, thanks, Lincoln.
Josh, could you put up the introduction of the speakers, or do you want me to share from my side? Good. Next slide, Josh. Josh, can you go one down? Okay, great. So thanks very much. And I know some people couldn't hear that too clearly. Hopefully you've got the link and you can look at it in your spare time. It was a video put together by C staff in-house. So it is a very simple production, but speaking to the sort of multi-talented approach of some of the C staff. So well done and thanks all. In terms of coming to the keynote speakers, it's really an enormous honor to be able to introduce to you the two guests. And I know Mr. Hodleni is in the room, and I'm hoping Mr. George is able to be in the room. We know that he is in Parliament today and will be kindly jumping out and speaking to us. So I hope he will be here. But as we go in, I've got the slide up because I thought people could spend some time, looking at the detail of the types of academic achievements and so on. But what I really wanted to talk to in terms of our guest speakers was when we put our minds to who would we like to be speaking into the space today, it really spoke to this notion of local government leading, and then the key idea of partnerships and speaking to what is the role of the private sector and what can they bring into the space. So Mr. Cilliers George is the CEO of Salga and has been there now for many years. His career spans a substantial number of years and crosses all the spheres of government and speaks from policy through to legal through to program implementation. So, a man of enormous experience, a man of enormous stature. And I think what stands out particularly is this ability to move into organizations and turn them around. And what also stands out when you look at Mr. Cilliers George's bio is just the number of accolades and awards that are acknowledging and recognizing the leadership that he has brought into the space. And I think what was particularly touching for me, and I think for all of us as a country, was just the number of these kind of unqualified clean audits, this certificates of excellence from the Auditor General. And in this month of the passing of the Auditor General, a man of equally enormous stature and leadership, this really stood out for me. So if Mr. Cilliers George is here, I would like to hand over to him as our keynote speaker. And we've really asked him to sort of look at envisaging the next 20 years. So we've been looking back at the work of the past 20 years, and the state of energy in cities will speak to that. And we've asked our keynote speakers to look at kind of going forward into the next 20 years, the role of local government in a new energy future, and some of the key opportunities, some of the key challenges into that space. Mr. Leila George. And if Mr. George is not in the room, could somebody let me know, and then I'm going to introduce Mr. Mahomed-Weideman and ask if he could step in first. Klengiwe Mazibuko, are you here, and is Mr. George in the room?
Looks like he may be running a little bit late.
Okay, I'm trying to catch up with messages. Is it the? Is it okay? Then Mr. Holeni, are you up for stepping into the space and reversing the order of speakers?
Good morning. I suppose.
We're going to turn it on its head. That is unless someone wants to say, well, Mr. George will be here in half a minute. Then we'd wait for him. But otherwise, let me move on to introducing Mr. Holeni. And maybe by the time I've introduced you, Mialani, Mr. Leila George will be in the room. So because in a way, it's a pair as well. I see the two of you as a pair. So that's Mr. Leila George. But then moving on to Mr. Mahomed-Weideman, we see a very similar, it's almost like, you know, the butterfly with two wings. Mr. Holeni, who's the group chief advisor of Ntiyiso Consulting Group, with over 20 years experience in the corporate management sector, but working very much in the local government space. And Mr. Holeni has worked intensively with the Ekurhuleni Metro and is currently, as I understand it, working with the Metro, with the city of Tshwane around directing revenue management and enhancement programs in both of those cities and achieving incredibly good results in terms of doing that. And it struck me actually, Mr. Holeni, that when we launched our very first State of Energy and Cities report in 2006, that the person who launched that report and who was the keynote speaker was in fact the Honorable Duma Nkosi, who was at the time mayor of Ekurhuleni, where I know you spent many years working. So that felt like a nice link as well. But I think what's also extremely exciting, and there we go, Mr. Holeni, we have Mr. Leila George coming in there now. But just to continue, what for me again is there's this length and breadth of experience working with the municipalities. But in addition, there's this engagement in developing new products and new thinking through the Ntiyiso Thought Leadership Circle. And that felt like a really exciting and interesting proposition. And in addition to that, Mr. Holeni is author of a number of articles and regularly provides commentary of issues pertaining to local government, as well as to utilities and the notion of smart cities. So, Mr. Holeni, we were also extremely gratified that you accepted the offer to speak here as well, because the feeling was that the pair of you really represent a certain stature in the municipal space, a certain leadership, but also the notion of how local government can in fact partner with the private sector. So a very warm and big welcome. Mr. George, in your absence, we introduced you, and we're extremely grateful that you could make it today. I know you are in and out of Parliament, and just to let you know what we said about you in your absence, a very quick summary was just really speaking to the extensive experience across all spheres of government, but in particular your leadership in local government and your leadership in transition and really in turnaround strategy and transition, and the enormous accolades that you have received in terms of that leadership. And perhaps on on a rather informal and personal note, I had the honor to be in a meeting with you once, and you won't even know I was there, but your chairing was of that kind of caliber. And I really, really do judge people by their caliber of chairing a session. And, you know, you were just in that sort of that league that was really outstanding. So, Mr. Cilliers George, if you are with us and willing to jump into the keynote address, a huge welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I hope I'm audible.
You're audible, Mr. George, and if we could, yeah, there we go. We've also spotlighted you. Thank you very much for jumping in between your parliamentary sessions.
No, thank you very much. We are hosting a 25-year review and reflection on the journey of local government. So I just jumped out, and maybe after my input, I would also request to be released, so that I can go back to that session. No. But I'm quite excited, Program Director, and firstly to appreciate the presence of all the participants, very eminent people that would be sharing reflections today on a very important topic of energy in our country, and how do we navigate the complexities of the changing dynamic in the energy sector. And no doubt ourselves as local government, we are directly impacted by those changes. So it's a very important topic that today you are convening to launch a 4th State of the Energy Report. So as SALGA in particular, we feel immensely proud that continuously on the installments of launching the Energy Report 2006, 2011, 2015, and now 2020, we are consistently working with you around this area. It's also a very important area in local government, because if you look at the financial model of local government, it rests amongst 4 pillars. The first pillar is on the revenue mix of local government that comprises of rates, that comprises of utilities, and energy is one of those in the revenue mix. Own revenue as well as intergovernmental fiscal transfers. But when you look at utilities like water and electricity, one of the most changing ingredient in that energy mix is that we now have renewables entering the local government space. And they are not in the immediate domain of control of local government, because we've been focusing on the electricity, which is a centrally generated resource. And by the time it gets into the distribution of local government, it suffers all sorts of things, whether it's technical losses, it suffers man-made losses, meaning theft and so on. All of those, they impact directly on the revenue streams of municipalities. So in the energy transition and the challenge in terms of the climate change commitments of our country, the issue of renewables, lessening the carbon footprint, is very central to us as local government responding. So we are quite excited as SALGA that we will be discussing that. So I thought, because my team said I must read the input so that I can be quick, I would reflect quickly on what is obtaining at the moment. And one of those is that in 2020, we are really facing an extraordinary year, no doubt. South Africa and the world are plunged into the largest health and economic shock that we have seen over the last 100 years as a result of COVID-19. However, out of this crisis emerges an opportunity for us to look deeply on how best we can drive sustainable change across all sectors of society. So we stand poised at a platform where we have no option but to look forward and perhaps seize the moment and drive a much more transformative and enduring agenda going forward that must not only address the shocks the system has seen, but probably help us to deal with contradictions in society. The serious, stubborn contradictions that we all know as a third world country, the challenges of unemployment, challenges of poverty and inequality. And there can be no better expression of those than looking at the energy landscape that continues to characterize where we are. Those who could survive blackouts of ESCOM, they would have installed renewable solar systems in their own houses. Others would have generators, but we must also think of somebody who has no means whatsoever, even a cent to buy a candle to light up, let alone cooking food. So part of this transition must make sure that it doesn't leave anyone behind. The issues around embedded generation must be very central in our thinking process. How do we make everybody a prosumer as opposed to only be consumers? Getting the right balance between enabling people to produce, to feed into the grid, but also for their own energy requirements. So the transitioning dimension is very important, but also dealing with the behaviors where we are able to say it is actually in your hands. With the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, how do we make sure that choices that people make, the peak consumption period that they want to get into or off peak, is actually controlled by them? Because this is a utility. The same way you are using data for other things, but you could actually plug in, plug out yourself in the energy system. So the empowering dimension must be very central to what we do in the energy space. So the second part is around how do we open up the chance to reimagine a much more sustainable world and address the deep existing structural flaws that have been exposed in our society, but also to deal with the question of the urban and rural contradictions that are characteristic of our country, but also ensure that the economic recovery that the president is driving is rested on very sustainable pillars to accelerate transition towards a clean, resilient, and inclusive energy systems, and also continue to place energy as the central driver of economic development in our cities. So for this reason, it is critical, Program Director, that government places clean energy at the heart of economic recovery package. We've seen the president launching economic recovery package in Parliament that is very much bold and looking forward to a much more coordinated and choice-driven action that places infrastructure development at the core of recovery. We've also seen, as recent as last week, a lot of pledges made in the investment council that the president annually convenes in a form of a summit. We've seen pledges around 109 billion rand. And when you examine those pledges, the higher proportion of those is on energy, on renewable energy. So how do we place local government at the center of being aware of opportunities that are there? Placing local government at a platform where it could start rethinking its investment attraction instruments, its investment retention instruments, and also identify the barriers for it to have agility to attract investment in a much more faster and enduring way, so that we spend less time on the competitiveness, but more on collaborative platforms where we can say City of Cape Town, City of Durban, City of Tshwane can work together to identify areas where energy systems are transcending political boundaries in such a way that we know that the investment we make in Johannesburg must also take into account the impact it will have on Ekurhuleni, the impact it will have on Tshwane, to deal with a much more higher energy conversation beyond the rigidities of our own boundaries. So there's a greater calling for us to say, we may be having the IRP20 now saying to us, we're going to allow you to plug in and generate up to 10 megawatts, whatever. But what are some of those areas we can drive the policymakers to say the industrial policy action plan that is very central to the reform agenda? What are some of the key informants that speaks to local government around those areas? So as cities being viewed as engines of growth, we're very central to determine the policy agenda. So part of this thinking in the energy report must help us to transition us, to place us in a better trajectory to drive economic development in a better way. So part of ensuring us that we are moving faster, it means we need to balance energy efficiency in terms of renewable energy interventions, to make sure that we can better scale up at local level, but also empower not only the cities, also include citizens in that equation, as I said. So the State of Energy report in 2020 comes at a very timely moment to make sure that as South Africa, we are in a state we can embark on decoupling the economy from the environment by transforming our energy intensive and centralized energy systems to one that places people and the environment at the center of what we do. So the fourth edition of this report discusses progress in a sustainable energy development over the last 2 decades, but most importantly, placing our cities, secondary cities and towns in terms of examining the industrial capacity that exists and what we can do to improve on the trends in the energy efficiency, and also dealing with city governance as very critical in placing local government as a capable institution. So I do want, through this launch, to encourage all the decision makers, planners, and lobbyists that are very key participants in the energy space to make sure that we can go through this report, but also use it as a repository of city energy data, but also take a very important critical look at some of the institutional successes and barriers that indicate very profoundly the emerging evolution of how cities have progressed in terms of understanding their own energy consumption patterns, energy blueprint, so to speak. So the report tracks energy trends and associated risks and opportunities, including impacts on air pollution, energy security and access. But also, when you look at this publication, it helps us to improve our understanding on the city's roles in terms of the energy transition, but also look at increasing visibility of local action in terms of how do we deal with issues of policies, finance, as well as business model that are very important, because if we do not take a step forward as cities, it threatens our very sustainability, because our major fiscal model is centered around energy to be the main subsidiary of the rest of the revenue mix of municipalities. So embracing the energy transition is a very important element of us as a city. The last part I want to raise on is around that when you look at this anniversary of the 20th report, the State of Energy report has been very critical. And as SIA, we are very proud that at the core of this is to make sure that we support these areas of work, but also make sure that working together, SALGA, SIA, as well as many other partners, Cities Network, the Urban Energy, other players in the space, we will continue to deepen our understanding, but also bring to surface various options that can inform policy choices at a local level, but also enable local government to improve its energy consumption patterns, its energy efficiencies, but place its best foot forward to be a reliable candidate to execute the policy agenda of the economic recovery that rests on the backbone of a very strong energy mix. At the same time, help us to transition in a much more just way in terms of taking our country forward. So we're quite proud as SALGA to form part once more of this, and we look forward to enriching conversations today, but also rely and trust that you are a partner who will continue to illuminate our understanding of how to navigate this complex arena of the energy transition. So on that note, thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. I think you're absolutely right that energy is at the heart of the municipal system because of the role it plays in the revenue. So it does pose this enormous potential threat to, but as you so perfectly put it, we have no option but to look forward, is what you said. And I think that's, really the message that there is only forwards. But in going forwards, the other key words you use that I really think we can repeat often is this notion of stubborn contradictions, that embedded in our system are these very stubborn inequalities, unemployment, and we are still failing to unlock that. And so moving forward, we absolutely have to do that. And I think you gave us some very, very practical concepts. There was, starting with this idea that we've got to empower people, so putting people right at the center. You then spoke about investment attraction instruments. And Mr. Holeni, I really hope you're going to pick up on that one. How do we make cities somewhere where the money does flow in? Because as you said, there is money. How does it flow into that space? How do we use this going forward to build the network between cities? So although we're locating municipalities as a key location, it should be one where we come together more, not go apart as a country. So municipalities should pull us together, not atomize us into lots of separate units, but one network. And then you also concluded with this notion of capable government as well. So, and I think that links very strongly into the role of SALGA. And I would like to just say from our side as Sustainable Energy Africa, an enormous thank you to SALGA. Our work, we're like a little David, like David and Goliath, and SALGA is the Goliath and we're the David. No, you're not the Goliath. We're not trying to hit you, but what I'm sort of trying to say is that we're very small, and through that partnership with SALGA, we can amplify the work that we do. And really just to credit you, your team at SALGA is absolutely fantastic. Your energy team is excellent, and there's this incredible openness to partnering and to working collaboratively. So I see that as part of the institutional transformation, the turnaround that has happened at SALGA under your leadership. So Mr. Cilliers George, enormous thank you, and definitely we'll be continuing those debates with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Mr. George. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Holeni, who I have already introduced. And I think it'll be fascinating, Mr. Holeni, to hear you pick up from that. And just to say also, similar to my personal note with Mr. George, that Mr. Holeni, I first heard you at the African Utilities Week last year. And it was really the incredible clarity and sense with which you spoke that just kind of opened up this particular space to us, and we thought, there's a partner we would love to reach out to. So it's to have you here, and over to you. Thank you.
Megan, we seem to have lost him momentarily, hopefully.
Okay, Mr. Holeni did drop in and out a little bit before, but he was here 2 seconds ago. We actually saw his face come up on screen, so we'll just give him a moment, and I'm sure he will reconnect. And this is the nightmare of virtual systems. Hello, Mr. Holeni.
Yes, good morning, and how are you? And how's greetings to everyone. Sorry for dropping in and out.
No, it's fine. Milani, thank you very much for being here and for tolerating these dreadful virtual glitches and hitches, and we really appreciate your time. So over to you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And I would like to also appreciate the opportunity, Megan, for the invite, and I suppose the wonderful way that you've introduced myself. I'm also still looking at, is that, really us or really me or myself? But anyway, I think, you have had the benefit of listening. So I will hope that, the work that we are doing, certainly within local government, is reaching the various quotas and is at least, if anything, sparking a debate that must be had all the time. Because with a good debate, we should be able to focus on solutions that we can put together. So thank you very much. And I've already greeted and to thank the keynote speaker, Mr. Cilliers George, who towers head and shoulders above the sector and continues to be a guiding light, for all of us. So we are really thankful. So mine is really, when you asked me to speak on building a vision for an equitable low carbon future for This in itself is quite a loaded topic. So what at least we have done at DISO Consulting, which is the company that I come from, we are continuing to build a lot of knowledge and thought leadership within this area. And we have come to realize that it's not a fallacy that the greatest population of the world is now being concentrated within cities. It is estimated that almost 60% of the world's population will be living in cities around the world. It is also true that cities are increasingly becoming more powerful, and in some cases more so than provinces, states, counties, depending on the political system that you see within the different countries. And this is based on the fact that they generate revenue, they have bigger budgets, and they are increasingly contributing large proportions into the GDP. And at the center of all of this is our cities as well as towns. And that is really the fabric of local government. And that is what I'd like to focus on a bit more. The other part of it is that we are facing this whole scourge of urbanization, which is a key driver. And it's driving the climate change quite drastically and in ways that at times our scientists are not able to even break it down to us as to what is actually happening. The increase in greenhouse gas emissions are having a detrimental impact on the environment, as well as the concomitant increases in terms of the carbon footprint. And that in itself, I think, creates, a base that we need to be looking at and manage and be able to deal with the changes within there. So at play is the fact that there are 5 key things that we have recognized, is that for us to be able to build this low carbon environment, we need to look at a coherent as well as an aligned policy formulation environment. And this is crucial because it's the only way that we can create consensus in the way that we implement measures that are going to have impact and are going to reduce the carbon. Number 2 is to look at this and the greater understanding and the cooperation amongst all the stakeholders. We know that we have a number of stakeholders that must play a role in the policy formulation, in the implementation, and so on. So in this case, we would like to be able to put together policies that are coherent and to have stakeholders that are able to work together. Number 3, each stakeholder should understand its roles and responsibilities. And as I go through, I'll break down each one of the points. We have also seen the power dynamics that have really dominated within this sector. And these power dynamics have at times caused policies to be stymied, implemented, and then causing an impact with regards to the progress that the sector should be making. The other aspect is we also have a profit motive or a surplus motive in the case of local government, but the other areas such as your ESCOMs and the private sector, there's a profit motive that needs to be debated so that we look at how that profit motive can be turned into sustainability in a similar fashion to the triple bottom line. The other aspect which I will touch on as I speak is around money. And money in the form of revenue, in the form of capital, is what will be required more than ever to be able to take this sector forward. So in focusing on the first point which I raised, Megan, is the issue of policy coherence and alignment is one that we find to be key because these policies that are currently being developed are in many ways developed in various spheres of government and being developed in various spheres of government. Each one of the departments that are responsible for these policies are almost driving a narrow mandate, which, for instance, may look at the environmental side of things or the tourism side of things and all the transport side of things, but never really an alignment that is brought forward to be able to align all of these policies to recognize that climate change affects transport, and will affect the tourism sector and will affect the energy sector in much the same way that each one would experience it, of course, to varying degrees. So in this case, we're talking about national government as the key driver of policy. We see provincial government, and we would have hoped that provincial government would be the ones that would be able to take the policy even further and bring it closer to the citizenry. However, when it comes to local government, we also see that there's a lag with respect to how policy is being treated and how the policies are being taken forward. And that is an area that we believe that local government going forward into the 20 years should be playing a greater role in terms of the policy formulation as opposed to receiving this policy. So there's almost a leading role that local government needs to be taking because that is how it can at least start to dictate and drive the things going forward. Secondly, I mentioned the fact that cooperation is one of the things that are required. If we look at the way that our political or governance system is organized from the national, the provincial to the local, there's almost a hierarchy that builds in people's mind. And from our side, we advocate that there is not a hierarchy, but these are spheres of government where each one of the spheres has a role to play within the ecosystem. The national government, yes, may drive policy formulation so that it enters the echelons of parliament to be enacted into law. However, the other spheres of government are key drivers within there. So none of the spheres are a lesser of a partner. So it is important that in this case, each one of the spheres work together and build on the strengths of the other so that they can create this hand of service delivery that is required. I would also like to point the fact that we've seen some power dynamics because of the lack of understanding of the roles and responsibilities of each one of the players. And in this case, without offending anyone, I would like to take a view that says the local government sphere is one that has a lot of competition, particularly with the likes of ESCOM, and the likes of the other players that are coming in. For many years, we've seen ESCOM as the organization that generates electricity, transmits electricity, and distributes electricity. However, if you look at the Electricity Act, as well as you look at where municipalities and the role that they are playing, they are essentially playing the last mile in this case. And the last mile means that this is now the cable into the home. This is where the homes must be paying, they must be connected, and so on. So the interplay between, or of course, the conflict of municipalities owing ESCOM on the other hand, is one that is undesirable. But on the other hand, the distribution side of the business is what municipalities rely on to be more sustainable. In one of the studies that we've done in one of the municipalities in South Africa, we found that it plays a key role in cross-subsidizing the other services within municipalities, and even within the other spheres of indigents as well as prepaid customers, it plays a key role. So municipalities require the ability to be able to distribute electricity to the point where they can start earning some revenue from there. But take it a step further. Municipalities cannot rely on, if you want, unclean energy. This is the space that we believe that municipalities, in much as we are seeing the IPPs coming in, municipalities need to be carving a role for themselves so that they can start being a player within the energy space, not just as a reseller, as it would be for what we are seeing currently. So municipalities have a greater role now to play as an energy generator, energy distributor, to enable the last mile. So be it the various forms of renewables which are coming up. Yes, there's a role for the private sector, and I will talk a little bit more in terms of how this partnership can ensue. But the point I want to raise is that the power dynamics where each one seems to play in the space that the other one plays, as opposed to cooperation, is one that must be at least managed, curbed, and municipalities be able to take the mantle forward to look at how the energy generation from renewables can then be achieved. The key aspect is it boils down to the customer and it boils down to the revenue. So the customer, in many instances, as we have seen across municipalities, ESCOM or any of the other providers of energy or any other services, there actually is only one customer, and that one customer is the citizen of that country. So if you want to deal with that same customer from different spheres, that creates a fragmentation, and we get a sense of one municipality receiving services from ESCOM, the other one receiving services from a municipality, really creating a conflict where you don't know who is the one that is supposed to be collecting or to be enforcing within there. So those are just some of the things that I just wanted to raise in my speaking. Of course, the issue at crux here is, how do we then move on to the next 20 years with all of these dynamics that are in front of us? So one of the key things which we've started to see is to look at how to create accessible urban forms of energy. And that energy mix means that the forms of energy that starts to come forth, and also from a diverse stakeholders, is one that must now be encouraged. So those energy forms of energy within the urban sector as well as the rural areas are ones that must be encouraged even more. So renewables, from where we sit, can play a key and very practical role with regards to even taking the most vulnerable sector of our population. If you look at the indigents, and that is for us a perfect example where a solar panel or a couple of solar panels, connection using solar energy, a solar geyser, and all of those start to take away the dependence on clean energy, as well as the unaffordability that we are seeing within the space. So that is a role that municipalities, we believe, should be facilitating to ensure that households start adopting, and the whole notion of co-generation, the policy around it, which is still uncertain, at least is made certain such that, the co-generation aspect is at least put to rest, such that we know how the interplay between the two is. The other part to it is that it's actually broader than just the energy side. There's also the transportation systems within municipalities which need to be looked at. So we need to look at clean and efficient urban transportation options. And those transportation options are the ones that will start to also contribute to lowering the carbon footprint, as well as making sure that from a municipality point of view, the new forms of, whether be it electric vehicles, be it gas-powered vehicles, and so on, municipalities can start playing a greater role, because the power socket where the buses go and charge, for instance, that must be there from a renewable source, which comes from the municipality at play. The gas-powered, forms of transport can also be taking gas in the city of Johannesburg, and maybe other municipalities. There's a gas pipe that comes into there that supplies various households, as well as the other forms. The next one is around looking at efficient building technology for energy efficiency. So on this side, and this is where also municipalities with their building control departments play a critical role, because they need to look at how they enforce new standards, so that new that are being built are more energy efficient, use less energy, use less water for the cooling, and also for the heating, depending on the seasons that are there. The next one is around local clean energy solutions. And here we're talking about including the waste to energy. It is now known that no new landfill sites are going to be built because there is not enough land to be building the landfill sites, and the sheer cost of building the landfill sites is increasing, and astronomically so. The ones that are there are coming to full capacity, and as they come to full capacity, we need to look at how then do we harvest the gases that are currently fermenting within there, so that we use that as a source of energy, and how do we also divert and focus more on the other forms of recycling and reusing, and so on, so that we start to use less energy, because the recycling in some cases or the lack of recycling may cause the piling up of rubbish and gas and so on, so that the energy that comes from there is still derived from unclean sources. The other part to it, which also was talking about management, which is exactly now on the point which I've just made, to invest a lot more around not incineration, not throwing away, but building now waste to energy so that we start generating energy from all these different sources. The goal in this case is for us to build all of these things, the accessible urban forms, the clean and efficient urban transportation options, the local clean energy solutions, as well as the efficient waste management towards reducing carbon footprint. The basis of it is that all of this must be sustainable, and that is the language that we want to put forward. And as you've started in your report, and something that totally has gripped my attention is a quote that I'd like to quote from the report on your side. And that talks about, the fact that you have started to see that, I quote, the data shows that although energy has increased in absolute terms since 2011, cities have become less energy intensive, showing signs of decoupling of energy from economic growth. This decoupling is largely attributed to a decreased electricity demand in absolute terms, possibly due to greater uptake of energy efficiency and renewable intervention in cities. It is a significant accomplishment in the electricity sector. And dare I say that not only in the electricity sector, but this is something that should be permeating across the various sectors. Because, for instance, to generate a kilowatt hour of electricity, you need much more liters of water, and that takes away from the environment as well. So there's also an interplay beyond the electricity sector, because water for our country and the climate that we have in South Africa, which is generally arid and less rainfall, we need to look at how we continue to be sustainable for the electricity sector and how we then take it into the environment in itself. And I suppose this is the point I was raising, that each one of the stakeholders should not take a narrow view when formulating policy, but there must be a cooperation amongst all of the various stakeholders, such that we can then be totally and truly sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holeni. That was a wonderful, as you were talking, I actually got this picture in my mind of this future where we say, the crazy idea of burying waste. We never lived like that in the past, and surely we can do better as a society. And in a way, that's a sort of an image really about all of the wastage in society, all of the kind of economy and culture that is developed around extraction and deposit, rather than a sort of nutritious cycle that you sketched for us. So thank you very much. I also really appreciated the 5 steps, and I think your first couple of points around the idea of a coherent policy alignment, and in a sense, it's time for government to go into a new phase, because despite the 3 spheres of government being cooperative, I think you're right that there is this kind of inherent hierarchy that's crept in, and a very siloed approach. And going forward, we need to break that down. So you identified local government as having a leading role in doing that, and to some extent that's absolutely right, because local government is managing transversally. So we really need to see local government being allowed to take that leadership role in the policy space and being deeply listened to, and not just shut down by national. So thank you very much for that. And then I think you're also right, collaboration is important and cooperation, but it will be greatly enhanced if we are clearer about the roles and responsibilities. And I think that's often when the conflicts arise, is when there's a sort of conflation of the technical detail with the policy, or we need to sort of almost pull it out and say, okay, you know, these people have made the policy, you're the technical people, you need to say how that can work. But when it sort of collapses, so I think often we get that wrong. So we're all experimenting and trying. And your last points were around the fact that the bottom line is that this requires resources, whether you want to call it profit or surplus, and that depends on whether you're a private sector or the public sector. But there do need to be resources, and those resources need to be well managed. And I think increasingly we need people who have more of an insight into that revenue and the kind of management of money, and as Mr. George said, the creating attractive instruments for attracting that investment into our cities. So we really hope that that is something that you as the private sector can bring into the discussions and into the kind of policy formulations in the collaboration that you speak of. So thank you very much. I'm going to now, really an enormous thank you to both of our guest speakers. And we're going to shift gears slightly and move across to our in-house speakers, Sustainable Energy Africa speakers. And Josh, if you can go down to that slide, I'd just quickly like to introduce, and it's, it's a little rough when they're in-house, you never give them quite the same time and attention. But firstly, I'd like to say just that, of course, at Sustainable Energy Africa, we're always very conscious also of the gender balance. So although we did have 2 men as our guest speakers, we're balancing this by our Sustainable Energy Africa female speakers. So Yachika Reddy is going to introduce the State of Energy 2020 report to all of us. And she will then hand over to Samisha, who will give the vote of thanks. Yachika has been with C since 2005, so many, many years. She comes with a master's degree in energy from University of Cape Town. And obviously over the 15 years, Yachika has been involved extensively in local sustainable energy development, climate response projects. Energy poverty has been a large focus and a passion as well of hers. And then also working into the vertical integration space that I think Mr. Holeni really spoke to now. And just to say that this is really the third state of energy that Yachika has essentially guided and steered from inception all the way to delivery. And she has absolutely no right to look as she still does, given that fact. And then after Yachika's presented, Samisha will do the vote of thanks. And Samisha's been with C since 2013. Also has an energy master's from University of Cape Town alongside a master's in biotechnology. And Samisha's focused on also at C, we sort of do a bit of everything, but from energy efficiency all the way through to the just transition and more of a national focus there. And it's a little unfair to ask Samisha to do the vote of thanks because, in fact, really she is the person to whom all of us should be giving our enormous vote of thanks. Samisha has, although it's an enormously collaborative exercise putting this report together, but Samisha has really been the leader here, and she has had to push and pull and wail and gnash and laugh and cry and bring it into fruition. So a really huge thank you, Samisha, from all of us. But Yachika, over to you. We're looking forward to hearing the main highlights from this 2020 report. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Megan, very much. I'm going to quickly show off my presentation.
Managing. We'll let you know if it comes yet.
Thank you.
Looking good. Yes, if you could just put it into presentation view.
Sure.
Thanks, that's perfect, Yachika.
Is it in presentation view? Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, Yes, good morning all, and here are the results of the State of Energy in South African Cities 2020 report that we are really very glad to have completed and finally show up what our findings are. And as I start, just to give you a little bit of context, I'm sure many of you here are urban practitioners as well, but just to say that the report provides insight into the sustainable energy transition to date. It tracks the progress in sustainable urban energy development over a 20-year period. Our very first one was in 2006, tracking earlier years, but it's over a 20-year period and in 20 of the most energy-intensive cities and towns in South Africa, and these include the metros, the secondary cities, and industrial towns. And the map on your right that you see provides a little bit of context and location of the 20 cities that feature in our report. The map also kind of would also give you a sense of the area that these 20 cities occupy. So these 20 cities are home to 50 or half of South Africa's population, but only occupy 5.2% of the country's land area, so very dense urban nodes. South Africa is rapidly urbanizing, with the majority of the nation residing in urban areas, and I think we currently stand at around 63%. And an important point to bear throughout the report and as I present the results is that South Africa's 8 metros alone are home to the 41% of the national population. So that's worth noting. And what our report really shows is that the cities are really energy intensive nodes in the country and have a very significant part, play a very significant part in the national profile of the country in terms of energy consumption and demand. What the 20 cities, just to give you some kind of perspective, that the 20 cities that we've tracked, they account for 38% of national energy consumption, over half of the nation's electricity consumption, 54%, again over half of the country's liquid fuel consumption, and a third of national carbon emissions. And they produce 70% of the country's wealth. So very significant contributions and very significant role players in the national picture, particularly with regard to carbon emissions, energy demand, and wealth output. So of that large picture, the metros, if you're just looking at 8 of those 20 cities that feature in the report, the metros alone for over a quarter of the national energy consumption, over a third of the national electricity consumption, and close to half of the country's liquid fuel consumption, and 21% of the national carbon emissions. And they contribute over half of South Africa's GDP. So this is just to give you a sense of the kind that cities play and how they are a major driver in of energy demand and a major influencer in the country's energy and emissions profile and socioeconomic development. So they are major players and have a fundamental role in transforming our energy system in the country and towards our country's path to a resource efficient and low carbon energy future. So these are very kind of densely populated, very urban and very urban energy intensive nodes. And further, the metros are really these engines of growth in South Africa's economy. The share of the population, the economic activity, the energy consumption, and the emissions that occur within metros is growing over time as well as a result of urbanization. Therefore, metros become really the cornerstone of important interventions to be made in pursuing a low carbon transition. Here's these are going to be a bunch of graphs that I'm going to be popping out, but some I'll kind of just draw out more or less the key messages emerging from these graphs. And to start off, I just wanted to give you a picture of the municipal energy profile by fuel type. So we've got these 20 cities that we're reporting and tracking, but what fuels are they using? What are they to kind of, you know, for people to survive and the economies within these cities to be driven? What are the fuels that are being used? So just the key thing here is that the blue, and what we've done here, you'll see that we've classed our cities or grouped our cities according to the metros, the secondaries, the industrial towns, and the smaller towns that feature in our report. But the blue really represents electricity, which is, you can see that electricity is quite a dominant fuel in the municipal energy picture, and the other two dominant fuels in the municipal picture are petrol and diesel. Okay, so that's just, you know, the kind of energy demand in the city really is met through electricity, petrol, and diesel. Moving on, so now that we know the fuels that have been used in our cities, what sectors are now using these fuels to get a deeper understanding of energy use in our cities? And the sectors that really feature very prominently is the transport sector, which just dominates completely in terms of energy consumption in a city. That's largely the land-based transport using diesel and petrol. The other dominant sector using energy in our cities is the built environment. And this is the residential, the commercial, government, and industrial sectors. And as you can see on the graph here, the industrial towns, the industrial sector is actually kind of the kingpin in terms of energy use there. Okay, so that's just to give you a sense of the kind of energy sources that are really dominant in the cities, which are fulfilling energy demand, and these are the sectors. So it's the transport and the built environment. In terms of the carbon emissions, so in the burning of this energy, carbon dioxide and carbon emissions are produced. And let's see what the picture looks like here. So what are, in our cities, what are the carbon emission types? So what are these, the fuels that are very dominant in terms of carbon emissions? And what's emerging here is the blue signified by electricity. And throughout all our cities, you see the metros, the secondaries, the industrial towns, and the small towns, you see that electricity use in this case is the dominant source of carbon emissions. Yet from the energy perspective, we saw that petrol and diesel were the dominant energy fuel types. But in terms of carbon emissions, it's electricity is the one that's the major player here in being the primary source of carbon emissions in our cities. And if we broke down, got into this a little deeper, so which are the sectors that are responsible for high carbon emissions? And the sectors that emerge are the built environment again, because the electricity is consumed by the residential, the commercial, and industrial sectors. And because our electricity is generated from very emission-intensive coal-fired power plants, as we know, and the emissions per unit of energy is higher than liquid fuels like petrol and diesel, we therefore have this high carbon emission profile within the electricity sector. And as we said, it's not just the electricity sector, it's the built environment that uses electricity that contributes to the carbon emissions. Now just panning in particularly on the metros, just because they are the kind of very energy intensive nodes in our South African urban energy profile. So what does this picture look like in terms of the fuel types that are being used in the cities, and in terms of the sectors that are using the energy? Which are the dominant fuel types and which are the dominant sectors that we need to look at where energy demand is being met? So again, in the cities, it's liquid fuels and electricity that emerge as major role players here in terms of energy used. You can see liquid fuels very dominant here, and so is electricity. If you broke down that into sectors, again, the transport sector emerges as the largest energy user in a city, or as much as 61%. And again, the built environment, the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors are using electricity, and they account for 35% of energy use. So very much like our other cities, but this just gives you a sense of the enormity of the energy use in the metros. And then again, in the carbon, in terms of the carbon emissions profile by source for the metros, again, we see electricity kind of emerging as the dominant source of carbon emissions in the metros, and for the same reason that it's because of our energy intensive, our coal-fired electricity that occurs in South Africa. And again, in terms of our and the built environment that are the key sectors here, but largely the built environment because of the electricity use rather than transport. And that was just a kind of giving you a sense of, yeah, what are the dominant fuel types and what are the sectors responsible in terms of accounting for large amounts of energy as well as carbon emissions. And having done analysis of this, we've kind of isolated 10 key messages that are coming out, or 10 key findings from our report. And what we found is that energy consumption has increased in absolute terms, as Mr. Holeni pointed out earlier on, and this consumption appears to be increasing in our metros but decreasing in our other cities, and for the simple reason that in our metros we have a concentration of people and a concentration of economic activity happening there. So it kind of makes sense that energy consumption is increasing in absolute terms. The other key finding is that electricity consumption is decreasing in absolute terms across most cities. And what emerges here is this downward trend that's occurring in the metros or across most of our cities is possibly due to energy efficiency interventions that are being put in practice, or fuel switching that's also happening, where there's been a shift from the conventional electricity to renewables in response to the above inflation electricity prices and the load shedding, the regular load shedding events that we've been experiencing over time. The third key finding is that the electricity demand in cities is decoupling from economic growth. Very interesting, this one. And here we're seeing this decoupling happening in the metros as well, which on average have a higher economic growth than other cities. And so they generally show the largest decreases in electricity consumption. And generally, a decrease in electricity use is linked to a slowdown in economic growth, or it's attributed to load shedding, as I mentioned earlier. However, what is interesting is that the economic hubs of the country, our metros, generally have seen a reduction in electricity sales despite having economic growth that actually just generally outpaces the rest of the country. And between 2011 and 2017, the electricity sales for Cape Town, eThekwini, Johannesburg, and Tshwane, these are the metros with kind of the most reliable and robust data sets that we analyzed, showed a decrease in electricity sales, with the greatest decrease in the residential sector, despite a high in-migration and population growth that occurred in these metros. So this indicates that residents are responding to above inflation electricity price increases, possibly by investing in energy efficiency and more recently renewables such as rooftop PV. A fourth finding we found is that petrol and diesel consumption appears to be growing in metros, unlike electricity. But there is something to be noted about this. A very important note here is where petroleum liquid fuels, or liquid fuels, the trend being shown is that it's important to raise here. It's always very difficult to interpret due to some data issues. So and these data issues are probably forecasted to actually continue into the future. And so what we're saying is that the growth might actually be slower than indicated by the sales data that we used for the analysis, because due to a concentration of fuel sales by wholesalers and a shift of wholesalers to large urban centers. So essentially what is happening is when we analyze the fuel sales data, the fuel sales is being recorded, it seems, more from a wholesaler point of view rather than where it's being used. So wholesalers could be located in cities, or in metros, or in smaller towns, but that might not necessarily be where the energy is being consumed entirely. So, so we say that the effect of this shift is that an increase in sales might not necessarily mean an increase in consumption in those cities, since the fuel may be shunted off to another municipality where it's being recorded as sold. So this is a bit of a data issue that's occurring in the petroleum and increasingly so in the liquid fuel sales data that's available for analysis from the DMRE. The fifth message is that emissions intensity, which is emissions per person in cities, is showing signs of stabilizing or decreasing. In absolute terms, what we've seen is that the carbon emissions in metros and most cities has increased. But what we are also seeing, I mean, that goes to figure that the energy consumption and energy emissions are increasing in absolute terms. But the average emissions per person, so the emissions intensity, is showing signs of stabilizing and decreasing. So an emissions per person is very high in industrial cities due to the energy intensive nature that's taking place in these cities, and also a smaller population than in the metros. So that's and again, what I'd like to add here is in the metros of Cape Town, eThekwini, Johannesburg, and Tshwane, where I've mentioned that we have more reliable data, is that the emissions per person has decreased. So, and we kind of attribute this to all the four metros have a long history of climate and energy action planning, and have also recently embarked on a process to reach net zero carbon by 2050. So really just showing here and demonstrating that metros are often the centers of innovation in enabling this to occur. Our sixth message is renewable energy in cities is on the fast rise, and I know many cities are present today, so this is not, you know, I know that this is, you're in the middle of experiencing this. And just to say that over the last 10 years, South Africa has seen exponential growth in the uptake of rooftop solar PV. And with decreasing renewable energy costs, increasing grid electricity prices, and the lack of energy security experienced by load shedding, South African cities are now really looking at renewable energy as a really promising alternative, especially with it reaching grid parity. So, and whilst great strides have been made in the uptake of SEG or rooftop solar PV, and work needed there as well, more work, but much more efforts are required in the procurement of renewable energy and the ability of municipalities to generate their own electricity from renewables. And what we're saying here is that cities will be able to purchase renewable energy directly from independent power producers as per recent amendments in the electricity regulation. But in this happening, cities really need to prepare for this opportunity through capacity and institutional development with a detailed, considered plan. And we say that cities need to be innovative and adopt a systems thinking to manage their distribution services with this kind of decentralization of energy production that's now shifting into the local government domain. The seventh message is around energy efficiency being underway in South African municipalities. And whilst there has been an enormous amount of energy and drive relating to energy efficiency in our municipalities. And just to say that energy efficiency is the quickest, cheapest way to reduce energy, and it has major economic, financial, environment, and social benefits. And cities can increase their financial sustainability by reducing their own energy demand within their own operations, so they can realize these savings by retrofitting their own buildings with energy efficient technologies. as well as untapping the significant potential from wastewater treatment plants to harvesting biogas. And we say that load shedding and sharply rising electricity costs have really created a lot of support for energy efficiency. But very importantly, what needs to also occur is emphasis needs to be placed on behavior change rather than just relying on technological solutions to for energy efficiency to come to fruition. So very important is that behavior change along with the technological solution. Electricity shortages are expected to continue for the next few years, as we know. And so really it's about partnerships of government, industry, and the residential sector to occur to actually really kind of embrace energy efficiency at a large scale level. And all stakeholders need to support a clearly defined path towards the net zero carbon goals. Our eighth key finding is around mobility and urban form. And as I pointed out, is that energy demand in cities is dominated by the transport sector. And as you saw, it accounts for more than half of the energy consumed. So major, the sector, is a major point of intervention here. The transport sector is fast-growing source of emissions, with road transport accounting for over 90% of emissions within the sector. So reducing this energy demand in cities will really rely on the transport sector and cities continuing to forge ahead with transit-oriented development, public transport and non-motorized transit infrastructure, and appropriate densification, as well as making the public transport infrastructure and the transport systems safe to be able to use. And another very important transport issue that's emerging on the radar and that we South African cities need to prepare for is the kind of uptake of electric vehicles, which is currently in its infancy in South Africa, but I think it's really taking the world by storm elsewhere. So, and electric vehicles, will have an impact on our electricity demand. So ideally, electric vehicles should be ideally coupled with renewable energy to help combat the increased surge on the grid and significantly reduce emissions. And knowing that when electric vehicles do need come online and they will need power kind of during our day times to be able to charge up and move around cities. And in terms of energy access, another key finding we found is that the proportion of electrified households using electricity is growing, while it's very obvious that the share of the non-modern fuels is decreasing in cities. But nonetheless, energy poverty does continue. So really then needs a deeper thinking as to the question is whether the approaches that to bringing relief to the energy poor, are they working or are they shutting down economic opportunities for the jobless? And again, another issue that emerges is that the huge achievement of the National Electrification Program really brings value in terms of quality of life, health impacts and economic impacts, but it's also enormously costly to the city fiscus. And raising the revenue to maintain this is a challenge into the future. So this really is something that needs to be grappled with for kind of future affordable energy services to the poor. And another key issue around energy access is the mainstreaming of gender in local government energy policies, really bringing in more women-led clean energy projects, and noting that women tend to be the kind of primary managers and planners of energy at the household level. So, so a sense is that cities could provide more direct guidance about incorporating or integrating gender in the provision of alternative energy resources at the household level, but more also including women in the kind of part of the kind of sustainable energy transitioning policy and planning that's underway in our cities. And then the 10th and the last message is that there's been enormous strides in energy governance that's occurred in our cities. And as Megan right at the outset of this event pointed out, 20 years ago where energy was and where it is now in terms of energy planning and governance. There's still work to be done, as always, and what we're seeing is that many South African cities now have energy plans and have strategies and action plans, but the challenge remains in translating this from commitment to action. And the other messages are that cities would need to shift from this traditional controlled top-down planning to a more dynamic system involving many more players and citizenry as well in ensuring the implementation of climate action plans. Poor governance remains a challenge in municipalities, and this ranges from very important high-level job positions, skilled job positions that remain unfilled, backlogs in infrastructure maintenance, which has been worsened by the COVID pandemic. And also there needs to be clear rules to ensure accountability need to be instituted, and very importantly is civil society and the engagement of citizens need to be strengthened to keep government accountable. And lastly, what we say is that cities forge, there's a really important need for cities to forge relationships and partnerships more so now than ever within its citizenry. And this is very central to advancing sustainable energy development in our cities. So balancing those trade-offs between improving livelihoods, stimulating economic growth through advancing energy development will really need careful consideration, planning, and cities will need to promote inclusive participation, sharing knowledge, and a very much deeper engagement with their citizens. And in terms of the way forward, what we've put out is that cities are capable of exceptionally successful implementation, but support is needed to make a more proactive implementation role. Vertical coordination is very important, and multi-level governance is strongly needed to really strengthen implementation at the city level to ensure equitable provision of services. And we feel that now is the time for developing sustainable cities through energy efficiency and decentralized renewable energy. That is the end. Thank you.
Can we clap hands?
I'll do it for all of you. Thank you so much, Yutika. And we are getting some questions coming through, and Zanie's already responding to one or two there. But I just wanted to say that I think, we're seeing the evidence clearly shows this kind of disruption in the electricity sector. But this going back to Leila George's words, one of the stubborn contradictions is that the liquid fuel space, the transport, the sort of literally the gridlock in our cities is still persistent. So we're still waiting for a shift there. And then I think there's also David Mahuma has raised in the chat here the issue of energy poverty. And he sort of says the forgotten challenge in the energy debates and practices. And I think that there really is the need for it's certainly not a forgotten debate in terms of the crisis of sustainability of the electricity subsidy, but in terms of the broader picture of, all right, we've had an electrification policy for 20 years, reviewing that and seeing what the next way forward is, I think is certainly a challenge. So I'm going to just open the floor now. We've got kind of 10 minutes for some questions and comments. And in terms of the ones that have already come through, I'm going to say to anybody in the C team, if you'd like to respond, please do. I'll try and direct them. But for people on the floor, if you could put it through the chat, that's going to be easier than us sort of onning and offing all of the microphones. So thank you, Barry, for your comment on energy efficiency. And maybe we can launch into that as a first topic and get a response. Zanie, you've responded on the sidebar, but maybe you would just like to respond. I think it's a commonly raised issue. We're seeing this, what we're calling a decoupling of electricity from the economy. How much are we sure that it is to do with, not to do with economic recession? And how much do we think it is to do with the balance between energy efficiency on the one hand and embedded generation on the other hand? Zanie, would you like to respond to that?
So, as I mentioned within the chat, the embedded
just
generation...
to introduce yourself, Zanie. Sorry, Zanie's one of our key data people within Sustainable Energy Africa. Over to you, Zanie.
Yeah, okay, anything spreadsheets. Yeah, so wherever there was data available, there's been a report released recently on the SEG data picture. I think it was the SELGA report. And so if the data was available, we did try and include information on SEG. It's still small as a share, but it is growing and it will be growing into the future. Generally, what we're seeing with the electricity sales decrease, and as has been pointed out in one of the briefing papers by Anton Eberhard, is what we're seeing is a structural shift in electricity use. It's not just short term as a result of the load shedding and prices, but it seems to be part of kind of like a bit of a long-term shift. And what was very interesting in one of my earlier energy modeling exercises, even before the big renewables started being taken up, if you kind of calibrated an energy model back based on 2007 data and then took exactly all of that same data and pushed all the technology levers, efficient technology, as far as you could, you still saw that it wouldn't match the real world, which indicated that there was something else happening, and that something else was behavior. And it was kind of highlighted within an energy efficiency behavior survey that I saw, where households were saying the first port of call is behavior change rather than technology. And I think that kind of drove the initial wave of electricity reduction that we'd see in the residential sector. But then, yeah, it's also been quite a bit of a response in relation to, well, now it's just pure economics. If you're a commercial center, putting PV on your roof pays back within 3 to 5 years.
Thanks, Zanie. We've also, there's a question there from Paul Vermeulen asking whether the liquid fuels is broken down into logistics and taxi industry and private transport. And Zanie's responded no, and Paul sort of said next state of energy report. None of us want to even think about a next state of energy report, Paul.
Paul, no.
But, I would just like to add into the space there, Paul, that the last state of energy that we did for the city of Cape Town, we did try to break this down a little bit more. And the logistics sector was startlingly big, if I recall, and we based it on an informal interview with someone from Imperial Trucking Services. So that was really interesting. And the other fascinating thing was that relative to the number of people that transport, the taxi industry is phenomenally efficient. And it was something obscene, like 90% of the transport fuel was in private vehicles. And obviously, some of those private vehicles are small logistics vehicles, but it's still a phenomenal sort of warpedness there. So I think your point is taken, and we certainly do need to work into that space more. And Sbu and Charlie from the Energy Office in eThekwini has also raised that there's been, the last couple of years, I think there's been an enormous focus on the power sector and decarbonizing of the grid. And maybe this is a message that the next era is really, we need to spend the next couple of years focusing on the transport sector. Thank you for that comment. So thank you for that. I can see Graham here. Okay, so I think that's a very nice question, because so Graham has raised that, you know, how much are we building support to local industry into these plans? And this really speaks to the Green New Deal. So if we are going to be using the economic recovery to promote sustainability and to promote green, how much is local government and SALGA ensuring that this really does support local manufacturing? And that really speaks into that stubborn contradiction of unemployment. So I don't know if there's anyone from SALGA. I know Mr. Leila George had to leave. If anyone from SALGA would like to respond, or anybody else from local government on support to local manufacturing. No. Okay. So in the absence of someone speaking, we've certainly noted that point, Graham, and I think it's really important. Nhlanhla, okay, there we go. SALGA. So Nhlanhla Ngidi from SALGA. Thanks, Nhlanhla.
Thank you very much, Megan, and good day to everyone. So I'm going to try very much to be as strategic and succinct as the CEO would be. On the matter of local manufacturing as local government, I think this is part of, I was going to talk about this later on the panel discussion, where we would be talking about the progress we've made thus far on the summit. But the summit that we hosted in 2018, part of local content was one of the strategic pillars on the outcome of the summit as well, where in any energy developments within the transition, we try very hard to make sure not to go as far as manufacturing, but to make sure that economic development that is energy related or energy transition related, it's actually involves a lot of youth, a lot of local people as well, in terms of the projects that are being implemented in the municipalities, even the tenders that municipalities send out for energy related projects. They are quite strict with the development of the local content. So in terms of the manufacturing, to be honest with you, we are not that far in energy related issues, but SALGA does have the cluster that is, discussing and moving with the issues of local development, local economic development at manufacturing level. And I hope and wish that my colleagues were here, because they would actually unpack the agenda of SALGA better, where the local manufacturing is concerned. But in terms of the energy issues, local content thus far on the capital projects, any energy transition related project has been quite strong in terms of the local youth and the local small businesses being part of that. And I think moving further to that is we're looking at the ownership of the projects for the locals as well, where energy is concerned. Thank you. I know I'm not directly answering the manufacturing issue, but I just wanted to make sure that we just highlight that we are quite involved in the local contents part of things. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nhlanhla, and Silas has also added into the chat around the kind of support that SALGA is developing for municipalities to procure PV. So thank you for that input there, Silas. We're going to run out of time if I don't bring it to a close. I wanted to just say that of course, I'm sure you're all dying to find the links to the report, and I have to tell you that the report is 99.9% done and not entirely complete. And the report will be, the link to the report will be sent to you very early next week. So anybody registered for this event will be sent that link. And we really encourage you to have a good and thorough read of it. And you're welcome to engage with us on it going going forward. In closing, then, just as I hand over to Samisha, who will then give the vote of thanks and close the session completely, I just wanted to round off all of the inputs we've had today. I think that we've got this the sense about there being no way but forward. So there's a sector in disruption. We've got the electricity, the energy sector in disruption. We've got climate change. We've also had COVID. So there's this enormous space of disruption and no way but forward. And as we move into that space, we have to tackle the threats that this disruption poses. Transitions never come without sort of winners and losers, and managing that. In the case of municipalities, this is really around the revenue streams, and we have to look at that. And we have to speak to the stubborn contradictions, the ongoing persistent inequalities and poverty in the country, and how to really address that. Holeni said that critical to finding solutions is debate and having good debates. And I think we would add to that then that critical to good debate is really the evidence base. And I think that's where the State of Energy 2020 report comes in, and particularly the process of monitoring data over time. It really adds value to the debate. And I think it also adds value to the quality of the data. So, you know, even Paul asking about that breakdown with liquid fuels, we don't have that at the moment. There is no way to find it, but we can start to explore it. We can start to work out, you know, methodologies to start breaking down those liquid fuels. So every iteration of this report, we try and go deeper. It is only possible through massive collaboration and partnership. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Samisha, who has led us to the point of delivery of the report, and who will also give the vote of thanks to everybody involved in this gargantuan initiative. Thank you, Samisha.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Megan. I can just change this. If somebody can just change the setting for me, please. Our honourable guest, Mr. George, I know he's left already, and Mr. Holeni, colleagues, and our most valued invited guests, thank you very much. It is such a privilege to be able to do this vote of thanks on the occasion of the launch of the State of Energy 2020. On behalf of Sustainable Energy Africa, we extend our deep gratitude to all the speakers for sharing with us your insights, your opinions, and your findings today. It has been good food for thought. Your messages are very clear. We cannot continue as usual. The call must be for transformation, or what some people are calling radical incrementalism. Given the power of the multitude of players in influencing the energy transition, the rapid pace of technology deployment, the disruptions, the need for ambitious climate response, and all in the face of dwindling municipal revenue, especially when it is most needed for implementation. Municipalities and national governments need to work together in partnership. That's been a message that's been brought out very clear by all three speakers today. Your presentations have squarely put into context the findings from that you presented, and all the work that we are doing on sustainable energy development, particularly as we navigate the just transition in a post-COVID world, and recovering from the economic instability, and for the next 20 years. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has been involved in the development of this report. The officials from the Energy, Electricity, Environment and Fleets Department from the 20 municipalities featured in this report. There are too many to mention right now. as well as the provincial and national governments who supplied us with information over this past year. Our sincere thanks goes out to Statistics South Africa, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, IHS Markets, and most especially Eskom and NERSA, who kindly supplied us with a wealth of information, making this fourth report the most data-intensive report to date. We now have for the first time a robust picture of electricity consumption in cities, both from the municipal and Eskom supplied areas. It has indeed been an incredible feat. Thank you. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation to our generous funders who have been supporting us for the completion of this report and throughout the years. Heinrich Boll Stiftung, the GIZ, the South African German Energy Program, SAGEN, the Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety, otherwise known as the BMU. I would also like to thank our long-standing and committed partners, the South African Government Association, Local Government Association, SALGA, SACN, C40 Cities, and the USAID South African Low Emission Development Strategy Program. Lastly, I cannot end without thanking my dedicated team at sea. Every one of you have worked tirelessly over the last few months, often well into the nights and weekends, to bring this report to fruition. It has indeed been a journey for all of us. Thank you. This report could not have been possible without any of the people that I mentioned. We look forward to your continued collaboration with all of you, demystifying the energy data conundrum, putting together the pieces of the puzzle as we work towards rebuilding our cities sustainably, empowering cities and its inhabitants, and closing the information gap for the next 20 years. I thank you all for attending, and a very happy 20th birthday to Sustainable Energy Africa. Nkosi to all of you that have walked this road with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Samisha, and to everybody. Go well.
Look up, you see shining. See the sky is blue. Look up, the sun is raining money. Look what the sun can do for you. Get your piece of the sun.